Thank you for joining me once again for another day text. We meet every weekday morning at 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's why it's so dark. The lighting isn't always very good, but I may try to add some lighting, but I don't mind because it's early. And so having a somewhat dim light is fitting for the time of morning that it is. But maybe so that it's a little easier to see me and so that the images are a little more clear, I'll put some lighting. Looks like this corner over here could use a little bit more. So usually during the day it's not an issue, but when we meet early in the morning, because it's so dark, the lighting is doesn't always brighten it up as much as it could. So in any case, I'm glad that you joined me today, and I appreciate you joining me every weekday when we go through these texts. It's a good way to start our day or end our day, depending on where you are. So I'm going to get right to it, and then we'll talk a little bit about tomorrow's CW Jaw Talk open session. I feel good, so I'm going to continue and do the show tomorrow. I was a little concerned yesterday I might be catching a cold, but that didn't happen. So thanks to Jaw for that. And I will get going here in just a second with the text. So we're working our way through Hebrews. And right now we're in chapter 5. Good morning to everybody. So I'm going to read a couple of verses. What I do during these day texts is I group verses together from the Great Message translation, which you can read online at the Christian Witnesses of Jah discussion forum. You have to register though. But in any case, so I group these texts together from the Great Message translation, and then we read and apply them each morning in a way that allows us to utilize the information so that we can help other people and then also be more aware ourselves of the things that we should be mindful of. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to get right to it. We're in Hebrews chapter 5, and I'm going to read verses 12 through 14. We'll make a brief application, talk a little bit about tomorrow's show, and we'll be on our way. Okay, Hebrews chapter 5, verse 12 reads, For even though you are required to be teachers on account of this period of time, you again have a need for someone to teach you the basic beliefs from the beginning involving the messages of God, plural. You have shown you have a need for what is easy, or for milk, not for what is difficult, or for firm food, so solid versus liquid food. And the analogy being made is the ease of digestion for the liquid versus the solid. Okay, verse 13. Because everyone living off of what is easy does not understand the message of righteousness. For such a person is like a child. On the other hand, what is difficult to live on, or firm food, is for those who are mature, those who have been trained by the regular use of perception senses, using your mind, as they have what it takes to decide between good and bad. All of us know the difference between good and bad. At some point in our growth, that's the knowledge we inherited from Adam and Eve. And that's why our conscience talks to us in ways that makes us feel good or bad about some of the things we do. Excuse me. We can deaden our conscience, of course, but it's still there. And that's what convicts us of things that we do wrong. Oftentimes, though, we make up rules for ourselves. Religions today have far more rules than we should have as servants of Jah and Jesus. We are freed from the law. That doesn't mean we can go running around sinning and doing all these different things because we're going to be accountable. But what it does mean is that we shouldn't try to make it more difficult for people today. And that happens in a number of ways. But getting back to the text itself, talking about living off of what is easy versus what is difficult. You notice in verse 12, he says, in view of the time, you need to be teachers. He even says you're required to be teachers. But that doesn't mean, of course, that every single one of us has to run out and become educated and then run around and start teaching everybody everything we know. It's more a question of teaching people who need to know and educating yourself about the things that they need to hear. So, verse 13 speaks of understanding the message of righteousness. Okay, so we're not talking about great complex involvement of prophecy and chronology, or even metaphysical relations between Jah and Jesus. We are taught that some of those relational aspects of the spirit realm in places like Colossians 1:15 and John 1, where we're talked about the time when Jesus lived with the Father, was the firstborn of the Father, and through whom he made all things. So, but to go beyond that and to try to make rules and to read into the metaphysical things that we're told more than what is actually there makes it far more complicated than what is being discussed here. Because again, it's the message of righteousness. And he does talk about the messages, plural, in verse 12, messages of God. But we're talking about the basic beliefs. Notice he says right here, so you might start to think that, well, he's talking about moving beyond just your basic Jah, Jesus, treat others the way you want to be treated. That's not the case. Because look right here, he says in verse 12, even though you are required to be teachers, then he says, you again have a need for someone to teach you the basic beliefs from the beginning involving the messages of God. The basic beliefs. Okay, and then beyond that, on top of the basic beliefs, you would then get the great message about the Christ, that he came down from heaven in a body that Jah prepared for him to give his life in sacrifice as the last Adam, repurchasing humankind from the condition that Adam and Eve sold us into death. So, but before you can get to that, before you can get to the great message about Jesus taking on flesh, coming to live as a man, living and being faithful to Jah to death, being resurrected, elevated to the right hand of Jah, before you can get to that, people need to know the basic beliefs. Verse 12, you need someone again to teach you the basic beliefs. Jah, Jesus, treating others the way you want to be treated. You have to first start with Jah. Or really, you should start with God, not even Jah. But once you establish that God exists, because life can only give life to life and we're here now, and so therefore life must be eternal, scientifically. And of course it's obviously intelligent when you look around and everything you see, including our bilateral symmetry, all of the things involving us in our world show us quite clearly that intelligent eternal life exists. That's who we refer to as God. And historically, we can show that that eternal intelligent life, whom we call God, is Jah. Okay? So you start with God. That's really where you need to go, because you can't start with the Bible. You can't use the Bible to prove the Bible unless it's referring to a place that another section refers to and they corroborate each other. But you just can't start with the Bible and assume it's true before establishing that God exists and then looking at history to decide where he's been involved, with whom he's been involved, and what writings accurately capture his involvement with humans. Once you do that, and this is exactly what I had to do after I left, around 2003 or so, after I finished my debates with Bowman and White, and I no longer got involved with the Watchtower because there was just too many complications involving the blood issue and other things. I had a young family and I just didn't see the Watchtower as the right place. And so I had to reconnect with God, though, because when you leave an active group like that and everything you do spiritually is tied to what they're doing, you literally become inactive for a period. I think most people, maybe not everyone, because you're not sure what to do. You're not sure exactly how to go about continuing your ministry and faith in God, because it's all connected to the Watchtower when you're a part of it. So it took me a little while to reconnect with my belief in God. It was the first thing I had to do, was to establish God exists. Life can only give life to life. We're here now, so scientifically life must be eternal, because there can't be any break in that chain. Otherwise, you'd have something that's not living, giving life to life. And then, of course, the intelligent aspect. So once I did that, once I was able to demonstrate to myself that there was evidence sufficient to believe in God, then I could just look again at history and the present, and it was clear to me once more that the Bible, the biblical records, and the God Jah were real. So we do need to have someone teach us the basics again. Just like that, God exists. He's eternal, he's intelligent, and we can identify him as Jah. And then from there you can establish that God, Jah, promised a savior or a seed, Jesus, that he then developed through the nation of Israel. And this is the entire record of humankind since at least the time of Abraham. And then before then, of course, you have the prophecy given to Adam and Eve about the seed. You had others like Enoch, who were faithful to Jah. And then, of course, Noah before the flood. These are the things that you should be aware of. These are the kinds of historical aspects of our history and what the Bible teaches that should come almost automatically to you, so that you can present them to other people, give them a good foundation for belief, right? We start with life, we move to God, eternal, intelligent, and then we identify that God in history, and the identification of that God throughout history brings us to Jesus, and Jesus brings us to the golden rule. So from there, you can then add whatever else you need to that involves the messages of God, the message of righteousness. Look down at verse 14. He says, those who have been trained by regular use of perception senses, as they have what it takes to decide between good and bad. He's not talking about having what it takes to know good and bad, right? We all know good and bad. That's the whole point, the knowledge of good and bad. But to decide between good and bad, it's not going to be 100%, because our desires, our sinful tendencies will at times, when we think, when we know something's bad or not good, we may make a mistake. We will. That doesn't mean that we're trying all the time to do that same mistake. It just means that we had a weak moment or a weak period of time in our life where we were more susceptible to difficulties or temptation. So we do need to be aware of ourselves in case we do decide to do something bad. Then we reflect on it and we can get control of ourselves and start to do good. That's what we should be trying to do, not making it harder, more difficult on people to do good, or overly condemning them when they do something bad. You're not supposed to be condemning anybody unless they're doing something openly offending other people and directly contradicting what is good, in which case you have to stand up and reprove that person. But when you see somebody struggling or having a tough time, unless they're just slacking off and they don't really care and they're not motivated, but if they're just struggling, that's all of us. We're supposed to be helping people, not making life more difficult. Because we all will have difficulty. And if we don't make it easier for others, then when we have difficulty, guess what? Others aren't going to be there to make it easier. And that's going to be Jah's way of showing you what you should have done toward other people. So whatever you're experiencing, good or bad, is either a reward or a teaching, likely from Jah, showing you where you need to make certain corrections. So if something's happening to you that you did to somebody else, this is a way for Jah to show you. Okay, try to understand what this means, what you did here, and how this applies, and this is the consequence if it's what you really want to do. So everything is very active, and we shouldn't think of it as dormant, or we shouldn't think of people's spirit or Jah's spirit as dormant, that they're not thinking, they're not trying. We start to make judgments and read people's mind when we do that, and that's a dangerous path. So we need to be teachers, try to help other people, give them the basics so that they can understand the message from the beginning. Eternal intelligent life, Jah, the one he sent forth to save us from the condition that our first parents chose to put us in, Jesus. How we can get along with each other today in spite of our differences. Treat each other the way you want to be treated. You establish those basic beliefs involving the messages of God. All three of those are from the messages of God. If you establish those things, you will have the right foundation to build on it with other information and teachings from God's Word that will then be properly placed in your house of faith. So keep these things in mind. We all need to be teachers. It doesn't mean we all have to always be teaching or constantly be teaching others. We should be learning. And we want to help other people become teachers and empower them to represent Jah and Jesus in the right way. by teaching the basic things involving the messages of God. Okay, so I appreciate all of your comments here. I'm just looking over. And so good text as well. Let's talk about this Saturday. So tomorrow, 8:30 a.m., we'll start a new series. It will be under the umbrella of the CW Jaw Talk, but it'll be a new playlist, CW Jaw Talk Open Session, number 1. And we'll start at 8:30 Pacific Standard Time tomorrow. And then we'll kind of get going. Usually in our Saturday shows, I start a little bit before we officially start, and we kind of just casually chat a little bit. And then we get into the show. We'll take questions, and we'll try to keep it informative and lively. But pretty much on these open sessions, you can bring up anything you want, as long as it's not disrespectful, offensive, or obviously rude. There's certain basic things that I would expect all of us to know in terms of proper content, and this is how I would treat anyone else if I were a guest on their program. So I would try to stay with the topic, which in this case is an open session, but understand what kind of channel we are, right? So try to keep us on somewhat of a Jah or Jesus or Christianity topic, but you don't have to. We can talk about really any religion, any earthly kingdom, whatever you want. As long as I am able to contribute to it in a meaningful way, we will talk about it. And we'll try to have these at least once a month, maybe once every month and a half or so that we can talk about things that aren't always specific to the scriptures, but that may be related to them in some way that we deal with regularly. So I think it'll be a good addition to the channel, and I look forward to it. So thank you all for joining me today, and I will see you tomorrow for CW Jaw Talk Open Session number 1. Thank you.